And will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable to you, God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The return of the prodigal son, as this parable is often called, is an instant classic. It has everything you want in a good story. It has family drama and conflict, a hero's journey and redemption arc for the younger son, and a feel-good homecoming where a feast is thrown. This parable is well beloved in the Christian community, for its theme centered around the joy of finding what was lost and recovering one who was estranged. Yet, as I reread this timeless story over this past week, which is a parable I genuinely love and find to be deeply moving, I found myself feeling something I never quite felt before with this story. It kind of rose up somewhere deep within my gut, and it said, I don't like this story anymore. There was something about this story that I did not like very much. There was something that did not sit well with my soul. And the more I thought about it, the more I reread the passage, the more I felt this feeling, and it became clear that what I did not like had to do with the older brother. I did not like how the older brother was treated in this story. I did not like how the father character treated him. I did not like his response to the older brother. It didn't seem to hold the same love and compassion he had for the younger brother. It felt unfair to me. In fact, the whole idea of the parable being called the return of the prodigal son, that didn't sit well with my soul either, because the title leaves out the elder son. This wasn't a story about one son, it's about two. Nearly half the story involves the older brother, but the younger brother gets the title and all of the attention in the story. Well, maybe now I just sound like an older brother. I am an older brother, by the way. I raised my hand. I don't know if anyone saw me when they asked who the older brothers were. I'm one of the older ones. So I know all about this dynamic where the younger sibling gets different treatment than the older sibling. So perhaps this is why the story doesn't sit that well with me, personally. But I also think there's really something for us to consider here about this dynamic where the younger brother is favored and the older brother is almost entirely forgotten. If we do just a little bit of digging and remember back to some of the stories in the Old Testament, this isn't the first time an older brother character has watched a parent or God favor a younger sibling. If we look back at the story of Cain and Abel, God looks favorably upon Abel, the younger sibling, in his offering, as compared to Cain, who perhaps understandably becomes a bit resentful towards his little brother. Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn son, is sent away with his mother so that Abraham's inheritance and descendants are traced through Isaac, his secondborn. Talk about being left out. Rebekah loved her secondborn son Jacob more than her firstborn Esau. It literally says that in the text that she loved him more than Esau. So she helps Jacob acquire Esau's birthright and steal Isaac's blessing. I imagine that wasn't super great for Esau. And then we know, of course, all about Joseph's father favoring him so much more than his older siblings that the elder brothers were willing to do something truly horrific. They sell him into slavery just so they could have some attention from their father. Story after story, time and time again, the older brother in the Bible gets the short end of their parents' affection. They understandably feel left out, unheard, and excluded. If you look back on today's parable from the older son's perspective, it reads a lot differently than from the younger son's perspective or the father's. The older son doesn't get consulted by his father when his younger brother wishes his father dead and requests half of his inheritance. I might want to be part of that conversation. The older son watches his father look longingly out on the road every single day, hoping the younger son will return. And when the younger son does finally return home, the father rushes up to him. But the older brother, the father doesn't even notify him. His father doesn't rush out into the field to tell the older son himself like you would expect him to if there was a strong and loving relationship. The older son only finds out that his younger brother has returned because he asks a servant what is happening, which he hears there's a feast at the house. Is it really surprising that the older brother didn't want to go inside to that party? Is it really that surprising that he was angry with his father? No wonder his first words that come out of his mouth are, listen to me. I've been here in silent for too long. I need you to listen to me. The older son's anger and grief lead him to speak his truth to the father, where he says, I've been here with you this whole time, and I feel like you haven't appreciated me. I have been close to you, but we are distant from each other. And in this moment in the story, when the older son speaks his truth, we realize the father didn't have just one estranged son. He had two. There are two broken relationships in this household, not one. There are two truths that need to be told and heard by the father. There are two lost sons in this parable, not one, but the father is only thinking about one of his children. Perhaps through the eyes and words of the older son, this parable offers us a warning. A warning about what happens when we fail to be attentive to the people around us. The context for Jesus telling this parable revolves around the Pharisees and scribes grumbling about him feasting with tax collectors and sinners. And a pretty traditional interpretation of this text is that the Pharisees and the scribes are supposed to represent the older brother in the story because of their refusal to join the celebration and eat with the sinners and tax collectors like Jesus. But what if the sinners and tax collectors were actually the older brother, and the Pharisees and scribes were the father? What if, like the father, these religious leaders' affections were fixated on all the wrong things, where they're constantly looking off in the distance, trying to get back to what they remember as a perfect relationship? What if, like the father, they are looking away from the people right in front of them, the older brother and the sinners, who are begging them to listen to their story and their perspective? What if the Pharisees are like the father, celebrating in their house, and then they keep on getting inconvenienced and pulled out of their revelry and joy by those who weren't invited to the table? Perhaps, as Jesus does in the Gospel of Luke time and time and time again, he flips things upside down and challenges our notions of who is in and out, who is holy and who isn't, who is bad and who is good. Jesus challenges the Pharisees and us to drastically shift our perspectives during this Lenten season. Jesus didn't organize amongst the powerful. He organized amongst those who were left out of the feast like the older brother. He took the time to listen, to hear their anger and their truth in a way that the Pharisees and the father in the story do not. When I read the father's closing words in this parable from the older brother's perspective, it doesn't seem like the father has actually listened to his oldest son. In fact, the father's words seem to be out of touch with what has just been said. His words fall flat and seem like an excuse. Maybe something like a pious religious leader might say. Perhaps a Pharisee who may not want to deal with the real issue that they have excluded someone and they don't want to own up to it. Reading in between the lines, we might hear the Father's words as, "We had to celebrate without you because your brother, who is more important than you, was lost and has been found." Now, you don't have to agree with my interpretation and what I'm seeing here about the older brother in this parable. There are many ways we can look at a parable, and that's kind of the whole point of this exercise, of putting ourselves in the older brother's shoes. The point is we're called by Christ to be connected with the people around us in our community, to listen and hear from people who have different perspectives and experiences than us. As we see from the older brother's perspective, what could be a truly joyful event for some of us can be a completely different experience for others. What is important to one person is not always the same thing that is important to others. And that's why we are working to get organized as a church like Jesus. It's why we're doing this listening campaign that you keep on hearing about over and over and over and over every single Sunday, right, Jonathan? We believe this listening campaign work really matters because this tool helps us hear you and hear each other. We really want to hear from you, and we want to hear your truth. We want to listen and hear your real, authentic self, and we want to make sure we're hearing others' real and authentic selves. We want you to feel heard and understood about your experiences in life and what really matters to you. We want to know these things because it allows us to organize the congregation around what is actually important to us. And we can't build the kind of kingdom, the kind of church, or the kind of community that Jesus calls us to build if we choose to exclude or create barriers that keep someone from joining the feast. We need to hear from you here in this room, from those watching online, from those in our 11:15 and African national services, from the folks who are part of the congregation on Wednesday nights, from those who use the space throughout the week, like the early learning staff and families in our connection groups. We need to hear from folks who are in our neighborhood, those who also care about this community, just like us. We need to keep on expanding our circle, extending the table, and seeking out those who have been forgotten and excluded, because we're called to hear each other's stories. We're called by Christ to be a church and a people who defy our present-day social climate of division that creates insiders and outsiders and leaves the most vulnerable amongst us behind. As a people who follow Christ, we have a higher calling that compels us to rise above the sins of exclusion, hate, and division. So in the months of May and June, if you receive a call from someone on our listening team asking if they can do a one-to-one with you, we'd ask you, please say yes to them. Say yes to them so we can hear from you and we can hear your story. And leading up to those months, if you have ideas about people who need to be heard and listened to, people who might be forgotten or excluded, please be sure to tell myself or Jonathan or Kathy Colton, Drew Jensen, Nancy Anton Jensen, folks who are on our steering team who are making sure we're lining up all the right people to be interviewed. Our goal is to listen to 500 people. Does that sound like a lot of people to you guys? No? Yeah? Maybe? For some of us? It is a lot. Last time we did 130 something, Jonathan, right? We did 130 something? 160 last time. Last time we did 160. 16. I'm sorry. 116. That's almost 400 more than last time. That's a lot. But if we pull this off, and I believe we will have done what Christ has asked us to do in the parable, to find those who have been estranged, to hear the cries of those who need to be listened to, and we'll have brought them to the feast of joy that awaits all who would join. So may we do this work together, church. Amen?